Greetings! Welcome to Nina's World. This podcast provides a short respite from the trials and tribulations of everyday life. We're going to step back in time to the 1950s and 60s. And now, our story. Nina learns big words. I'm intrigued. The weeks of second grade turned into months. Nina was enjoying school because Mrs. Wagner made learning more interesting, more fun, more relaxed. She didn't make the boys and girls answer questions like a machine gun's rat-a-tat-tats. She didn't click her fingers and tell them to hurry up. Occasionally, Nina needed time to think about her answer to a question, like when Mrs. Wagner asked the students what they thought was going to happen next in a story during read aloud. That was Nina's favorite part of the day, even if you counted recess and lunch. The students' answers would be written on an easel paper, and then, as if solving a mystery, Mrs. Wagner dramatically turned the page of the book and continued reading. It didn't matter if a classmate was right or wrong, only that they volunteered an idea. And then, as if they were writing their own story, Mrs. Wagner would ask the children to talk about the predictions. It got trickier when a student had to explain why he or she thought a particular thing was going to happen. So much for Charlie's idea that spaceships would land in Clara Barton's cornfield, even though Mrs. Wagner said it certainly would have been intriguing. That Mrs. Wagner, she liked to use big words. Nina didn't know how to spell them, but sometimes she used them at home. One afternoon, Nina asked, "Hey, Mom, I'm intrigued. What's for supper tonight?" Her mom laughed. "Mrs. Wagner at it again, huh? And what does that big girl word mean, Nina?" Nina tried her best to explain, and they both laughed. Her mom gave her another idea. "You could also say that you are curious about what's for dinner. And I would say that if you peel the potatoes, that would give you a hint." Nina wasn't laughing when her mother gave her the peeler and pointed to the bag of potatoes, but it felt good to get to talk to her mom without a lot of her sisters butting in. So Nina placed a sheet of newspaper on the counter, pulled over the step stool, and got started. Yak, 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 blab, blab, blab. On they gabbed, while her older sisters practiced their musical instruments in the dining room. What a cacophony! Ha ha ha! Nina thought, another big word. I can say it, but I don't know how to spell it. Someday I'm going to learn how to spell a lot of words so I can write better stories. Another day at school, Mrs. Wagner pushed a cart loaded with red-backed books from the closet, asked a couple students to help place one on each desk. Nina opened the book as soon as it was within reach. It was heavier than she expected, like the hymnals at church, and to her dismay, only had pictures the size of the flat of her hand and not nearly enough of them. Mrs. Wagner never minded if her students acted like detectives when opening a new book. She walked around the room while the students fanned the pages, murmured an occasional word, and then scrutinized the funny symbols in parentheses. Mrs. Wagner explained that the book was a dictionary, and it listed words from the beginning of the alphabet to the end, and it would say what the word meant. Nina was intrigued. There was going to be a lot to learn in second grade. Nina had noticed that Buddy had difficulty turning pages. Their math workbooks had large sheets that had to be ripped out, completed, and given to Mrs. Wagner. Nina saw that Charlie would rip out the page in his own book, slide it over to Buddy so he could get started. It took Buddy longer to write because he had to grasp the pencil between his finger and the palm of his hand instead of the penmanship grip that the other children were being taught. Charlie would then take Buddy's book, rip out the same page, and use that one as his own words. Nothing would be spoken, just a camaraderie that developed between the two boys over the last few months. Nina was a little jealous because she had been Buddy's friend before anyone else in the whole school. On the other hand, Nina felt overjoyed because Buddy had more friends now, and that was a good thing. Nina was pondering these things in her heart because friendships could be, daydreaming again. She still had to do her math. What's a girl to do? Nina answered her own question. She should finish her math paper. That's what she should do. And there was something special about the beginning of spring that made walking home from school extraordinary. The dismissal bell rang. Charlie took the bus, and Betsy's mother picked her up in the car. Martin had baseball practice and would walk home with his friends later in the afternoon. But for Nina, her sisters, and Buddy, it was marvelous to walk along the tree-laden streets towards home. Buddy joined Nina and her sisters each afternoon as they trekked to the busiest street and waited for the crossing guard to facilitate their passage home. Nina felt deep affection for her new vocabulary, and although she often misused the words just a bit, well, maybe a lot, it did not deter her from sprinkling them like pepper on a baked potato while speaking. The three sisters and Buddy continued their saunter street by street as they rambled closer to where Buddy had to make a left turn and walk the rest of the way to his house. He made the girls laugh when he turned to them, pretended to remove a hat, swung his right arm to his waist and bowed. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be tomorrow. Nina, playing along, placed her forearm above her brow, shaking her head gently to and fro, replied, "After all, tomorrow is another day." Nina's sister looked at each other stonily. Martha, the first grader, pulled at her pigtail, was waiting impatiently. The older sister, Dorothy, rolled her eyes to heaven and commented, "Again? We have to listen to this baloney again? We still have a ways to go, you stooges. It's easier to talk with you before Mrs. Wagner became your teacher and started filling your head with fifth-grade words. So, Buddy, no offense, but put an egg in your shoe and beat it. Let us see you tomorrow. We're going to make like trees and leaf." And so they did. The end. Thank you for visiting with us today. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with everyone you know. Return next week for another story from Nina's World. This story was written and read by Christine McKee, with gratitude to Dr. Ethel Ratkin of Bucks County Community College for editorial consultation and encouragement. Additional heartfelt support from family, friends, and members of my writing groups. Technical support was provided by Mr. Dan Tarrant of Personally Catholic. Sound engineering by Mr. Andrew Kimmock of AK Productions. May you embrace peace in your heart, in your home, and in your world.